The first team we're going to talk about is a newcomer to the bottom of the standings, the projected bottom of the standings, and that is the Washington Wizards.
Yeah, I mean they've been here before, but it's been a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, always a team that's basically been in purgatory for many years now. I mean, they had a stretch back in like the 2017-2018 period when John Wall was healthy and on the team, teamed up with Bradley Beal. And that was a team that was, making the playoffs. They were definitely in the lower four seeds in the Eastern Conference, but they were making the playoffs or competing for it for several consecutive years. But then, after John Wall's injury issues started happening, the Wizards have just kind of dropped off a little bit more and more every season. Last year, they failed to make the playoffs, and they are finally deciding to change direction. Um, and yeah, they made a lot of moves this offseason. Do we want to just briefly recap what the moves that they made?
Yeah, let's get right into it.
Yeah, well, they shipped off Bradley Beal to Phoenix, got 4 first round pick swaps in return, 6 second round picks, and they got Chris Paul, who they ended up swapping to the Warriors for Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, and Patrick Baldwin. Maybe one of those other guys. Jordan Poole is the only guy you hear about, but potentially like Patrick Baldwin saw a few minutes for the Warriors last year. He was like super highly regarded coming out of high school. Maybe he's something to be excited about too. I don't know.
I think the tough thing with Patrick Baldwin is that that is a place where they have a little bit of a positional glut of similar kind of like Wizards prospects. There's a lot of sort of like combo forwards,
Yeah,
besides like, if Kyle Kuzma is their best player, like that's the position he plays. Denny Avdija is like one of their more recent lottery picks. They just drafted Bilal Koulibaly. So it does feel like that's the worst position Patrick Baldwin Jr. could be in to get be likelihood of minutes. That being said, like there's a lot of positional versatility there, and they can. Who knows what kind of lineups they're going to find. They don't have a lot of bigs on this team. This is like a sort of like guard and wing heavy team.
yeah, yeah. I mean, part of that is they traded their one standout big man from last year, Porzingis, to the Celtics in a 3-teamer. They picked up Tyus Jones in return, which doesn't seem like great value on the surface, but in reality, it was because it was a opt-in for Porzingis. He was
Yeah.
not on a real contract. He opted into a player option to facilitate a move. So getting Tyus Jones in return, one of the better backup point guards in the NBA, possibly a solid low-end fill-in starting point guard on a team that's not trying to win a whole lot.
Well, that's what he is right now, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that's. I mean, my assumption is that Tyus Jones will start. I've got my projected starting lineup for the Wizards is Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole in the backcourt, Kyle Kuzma and Denny Avdija in the forward spots, and then Daniel Gafford holding down the middle.
yeah. And he definitely will because they also traded Monte Morris, who
Yeah,
was one of a pair of point guards that logged minutes for the Wizards last year to the Pistons for a second round pick, which I thought was, not great value for Monte Morris.
yeah.
You
Monte
know,
Morris is good.
he's a good player. He's an impactful, another very high end backup point guard, occasional starter in a pinch type of player. Yeah, just getting a second round pick for him, I was a little surprised by that they're so eager to get off of him.
Yeah. They also have, speaking of good backup point guards, they do still have DeLon Wright, who was
Yep.
injured the first part of the season last year, but when he came back, really flexed as a ferocious point of attack defender. He's got a lot of size. He was extremely disruptive in the backcourt. He was getting steals galore, and he was actually one of the more fun parts of watching the Wizards, which is not something that a lot of people did a lot of. But yeah, DeLon Wright was fun. He averaged like 1.8 steals in only 24 minutes. So that's a lot. That's a lot of steals. That's not very many amount of minutes. So I mean, he's going to play a ton probably for Washington this year
Mhm.
because I mean, there's just not a whole lot of NBA talent unless we see, I don't know, like if Johnny Davis is definitely going to get another shot at big minutes in the backcourt. He was a big time draft disappointment in his first year, but there's big opportunity to bounce back. We'll see. Um,
Yeah, but you never know. A lot of players who end up being okay have pretty disappointing rookie seasons. It wouldn't
Yeah,
be the first time.
yeah, and he's got a great opportunity right now because there's definitely he'll be competing with Landry Shamet for you know off the bench backcourt minutes. And I think if you can't beat out Landry Shamet for those minutes, I think that will be a little bit disappointing of a second year for Johnny Davis. So definitely a player to keep an eye on. Man, Wizards draft picks are not that fun without like hating on any of these players. It just feels
Yeah,
like they have a talent for finding the most like underwhelming. Like it's like they go for these. They never go for the home run. They go for these like safe picks that end up just not ending up being safe at all. Of course, they flipped that entirely this year by surprising everyone and drafting Bilal Coulibaly, which is about as like
yeah, not a safe pick at all.
no biggest prospect. I mean, biggest project I'd say in the
Yeah.
like top 10 picks. But a lot of people are extremely excited about it. What did J. Kyle Mann has taken to calling him the Parisian Pippin. Not a bad nickname. And the summer league footage was promising. Just like huge
Mhm.
stride length, a nice mix of skills. Definitely able to kind of like get to the rim and finish over people. Promising form on the jump shot. Like not we're not expecting huge results in year one, but like he's just kind of like a blank slate that doesn't look. He's not like a Bruno Caboclo 2 years away from being 2 years away. Blank slate.
Mhm.
Like he looks ready to play a bit in the NBA right now and learn on the fly while without having any kind of like limits on his potential in a whole bunch of like facets of the game. Like he just has a very like there's he can do a little bit of everything in a way that's kind of exciting. So and that's their number one, like that's their priority one prospect right there is Koulibaly, right?
Yeah, I mean, he just doesn't have a lot of experience playing high level competition. I think is the one knock against him. So, the more I looked into Koulibaly, the more I realized, like, okay, he barely played at all with the Mets '92, a team, varsity team, whatever you want to call it. And his numbers on that weren't that impressive, but he did get a lot of run on their junior team. I think the French. I'm not sure how they break it down age wise, but their equivalent of the U19 league or whatever. The Mets '92 also have one of those teams, and he was averaging around 20 points a game when he was playing with the junior squad and looked
Yeah.
great. So, I mean, definitely flash skills. This isn't like just a guy who's an athlete, but it's unclear whether he can handle a basketball.
Yeah. Let's maybe kind of, let's with each of these teams, but with the Wizards right now, let's maybe like zoom out and kind of imagine what does the season look like if they exceed expectations, and then also sort of like what is the like worst case scenario or something more
Yeah.
close to that. I think since we're projecting them at the bottom of the league, the worst case scenario is maybe the most likely scenario, but I look at this roster and at least like I don't think it's poorly built. It's not one of those teams that is bottomed out and doesn't look like they can put real lineups out there. Like I look at this and I see Tyus Jones is an excellent decision maker in the backcourt, which means that Jordan Poole will not be the primary decision maker with the ball in his hands, which I think is a good thing because you want to put him in a role where he kind of just gets to sort of like attack and not have to be responsible for too much playmaking. His decision making was very questionable looking last year. Kyle Kuzma is able to like contribute on offense in a variety of ways. Like it's a transition score, he can get his own offense, and he's not like his all around game is a little bit underrated. And then they've got this kind of promising defensive front court in Denny Abdija, who's been an excellent man defender, and Daniel Gafford, who is like a legitimate rim protector if nothing else. So their
Yeah.
starting lineup is like not. Um, I don't think sad. I think that lineup can hold its own against other starting lineups in the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, but it's still like a low end starting lineup. Like, they don't have very many guys positionally that you would ideally want to be starters on a team that's trying to compete. I mean, I think Kyle Kuzma is probably the main guy that you would kind of qualify for that role. Um, I kind of agree that it's not going to be a complete disaster for the Wizards. I'm still projecting them to kind of be in the low 20 wins territory,
Yeah.
because I do think that management has found a trajectory where they do want to follow this through and bottom out this year. They do want to make their own draft picks as valuable as possible because they don't have a huge cache of other teams' draft picks. They got a bunch of swaps from the Suns, but those are so up in the air. You have no
Yeah.
control over how those play out. So I do think maybe it'll be one of those situations that we often see with these tanking teams where early on in the season they're a little bit competitive, but they don't have many other options to turn to. As teams kind of scout them and figure them out, they really struggle to win games. I mean, I think this is a team that's really going to struggle to compete, in fourth quarters of competitive games.
Yeah, there's a couple things about that. I think I can picture again, like on the positive side, I can see this team, just not being in the basement on either side of the floor, just sort of like having enough offense and defense and players in the right roles where they're sort of like 20th on both ends instead of closer to 30th, which is when you
Hmm.
really start getting to the bottom of the standings. There's like when you think of a team like San Antonio last year that just didn't fill positional requirements. But I do think that like on the high end of things, you're getting into a close game and you're counting on Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma to generate offense down the stretch. And not that those guys are the worst at that. It's just the other team is likely to have better options than that. So you can see
Yeah.
them winning a lot of close games, even when they play well. And then on the negative side of it, it's just like this is the kind of team that one injury just kind of like sinks all their functionality. Like, they lose Tyus Jones for like a stretch, and all of a sudden, well, actually, I mean, like then DeLon Wright is starting, but they don't have a backup point guard anymore. All of a sudden, they're just like relying on someone who's not ready for minutes to like play a huge thing, and then all of a sudden you're on a 7-game losing streak, or you go sort of like 2-10 over a chunk of time, and your season's kind of lost, sort of thing. Because I don't see the depth here. Like even the guys they have under contract, it's like it's a pretty shallow rotation unless a couple of the young guys pop more than we're expecting them to.
Yeah, I think defensively they might survive, climb out of the 20s, at least during that first half of the season. But offensively, I think it's going to be rough. The team lacks awesome spacers, and also, and probably more importantly, they lack a guy who is a really who can both break down a defense because Jordan Poole can do that at times, but then also make the right read and pass out to open teammates because
Yeah,
Jordan Poole cannot do that very consistently at all.
yeah. And they're going to be likely starting. I mean, who knows if Denny Abdi just start? I'm going to assume that Denny Abdi is going to start. Um, Last year he started about half their games. Um, and it really kind of depends on where they want to play Kuzma or if they want to go smaller than that. But it's like if it's him and Gafford, that's basically a non-shooting front court.
Yep.
Um, Kuzma is an acceptable but not great shooter. Jordan Poole can obviously fill it up, and Tyus Jones is also sort of just like an average. Has only just kind of got into the like average shooting territory. So
He's a set shooter though. I mean, he's not like
yeah,
a guy that you have to really play up on.
yeah. So the spacing will be a bit questionable even when they're at full strength. And then let's say Jordan Poole goes down, and then you're starting Landry Shamet or Johnny Davis, and all of a sudden you're just not really looking like an NBA team. But I can see like this starting lineup being solid,
Okay.
surprisingly
Yeah.
solid, if this team stays healthy, and them creeping out of the bottom 5. I don't think that's the likely scenario, but that's like the rosy scenario. It's like, oh, this starting 5 just fits together really well, and you know what, Koulibaly or Koulibaly's like surprisingly good. Maybe Corey Kispert kind of comes into his own more as a movement shooter. He's still a really good shooter, Corey Kispert. He just hasn't really like
Mhm.
managed to kind of the overall package has not really quite popped at the NBA level. But I mean, he played a lot of minutes last year and he like hit a lot of threes, did not miss very many threes. So
I can assure you, I watched a lot of Corey Kispert in college. I mean, what he's shown in the NBA is, pretty similar to his college game. There wasn't really a whole lot else to his game
yeah, but
other
I
than
mean,
running off screens and spotting up. But
it's just such a difference though when you go from being in college at that size where he was kind of like a big strong wing doing that game, and then goes in the NBA and is immediately downgraded to just sort of like I'm
a
almost always the least
regular
athletic guy on the
sized
floor.
wing, yeah.
Yeah. And then not a lot of like, in terms of even I couldn't find, unless you're there's a few other, like, looking down their depth chart, or players that could potentially pop, like on some of their two ways and stuff like that. I don't have anyone on my list that I'm like curious to see them creeping in, but I do think there's 3 or 4 guys coming off their bench that could make a surprise impact. Be it Johnny Davis, Corey Kispert, obviously Bilal Koulibaly would be really fun. And Mike
Yeah.
Muscala has always been a solid, like, kind of lineup lifter off the bench, with just sort of his ability to shoot and do some very basic rim protection. And then DeLon Wright is going to give them defense off the bench. So they have a chance at a solid NBA rotation. And that's all my Wizards thoughts.
Yeah, I guess my final Wizards thought is just, let's look forward to the trade deadline here. I'm sure the Wizards would love to pick up at least, one more pick, or one more young player, one more asset this season. Um, and then, yeah, I hope Patrick Baldwin gets a chance. I'm sure he will get an opportunity to play, but, there's a little bit of something with him on the Warriors, just obviously not enough to hold on to him when the potential of getting off of Jordan Poole's really bad contract, as well as picking up a piece in Chris Paul that can help them compete this season, was a possibility.
Yeah, we should also mention that Danilo Gallinari is on that roster. He missed all of
Yep,
last season with
for
injury,
now.
and he's pretty old, but he's like, if he bounced back a little bit, that is another, like, really functional NBA veteran who can do stuff with the ball in his hands. Like, the kind of, if
Yeah,
again, if he gets back anywhere to where he was before his injury, the kind of player that, like, oh, you got nothing going on offense, like, you might as well put the ball in my hands and I'm going to, like, draw a foul or get a shot off, kind of thing.
yeah.
That's sort of his specialty.
He's one of those guys where you can just kind of toss him the ball and he can shoot it, and it's probably a decent quality shot. Just don't expect him to give you much on defense, even when he had his
Yeah.
athleticism. Danilo
Yeah.
wasn't a great defender, so
He also might, I mean, I hope not, but he also could be done. Like, that's like a pretty bad injury to get late in their career, and he is more of a contract for them than a player they're planning to build around. But
yeah,
who knows? Sometimes these vets kind of just like pop off in a season and like up their trade value, and the teams kind of let it, like, oh, maybe we could actually flip Danilo Gallinari for something, because he's like shooting 45% from three and averaging 11 points per game.
yeah,
I think that's the on the negative side of Wizards things in terms of projecting their final win total. Yeah, what if this team just found a good trade partner for Kyle Kuzma or Daniel Gafford, and all of a sudden they're not putting out real lineups at all, and then they're just in pure tank mode, which is what Wizards fans probably want. So no
yeah. It's
one's going to
probably
be.
probably best for the team anyway.